I I just, I've had this feeling for a long time. And it's like I'm standing outside myself, watching me do things I don't want to do, you know? Just seeing me like I'm somebody else, but never ever being able to stop the show. I'm tired.
It's Cuddy, right?
No, man. Dennis.
Alex Cottrell and Toby Huntingford present Caught on the Wire. This podcast is an episode-by-episode analysis of HBO's widely acclaimed TV series about the city of Baltimore, its people, and its many problems. Find more information about the show and all the episodes online at caughtonthewire.wordpress.com. Hello again, welcome back to Caught on the Wire. It's Season 3, Episode 7, Backburners. It's another beautiful day today. It's Wednesday, it's recording time. Well, it's Friday if you're listening to it on the first day. And actually, it doesn't really matter because whatever day you're listening to it on, it's that day. It's that day, and it's time for Caught on the Wire.
Yeah, the beauty of the podcast. Wherever you are, whatever the day is, you can be listening. Yeah.
It's always time for Caught on the Wire.
Yeah, definitely. So I'm glad to be back. Flying through. How have you been doing, Alex?
Yeah, nice. Had a bit of a busy week this week. Going to be doing a bit of recording, and I've got a gig tomorrow. No, Friday, and a lot of band stuff going on at the moment. Recording some new tracks with Glossum. So been very busy, but it's nice to be recording this as well. It's just a slightly different change of pace.
Sweet. Yeah, it's been a pretty...
I understand that Listener's Corner is a little vacant today.
Oh, yeah, I've been watching it all week. Nothing has come in this week.
Sad about that.
Don't know what has changed in the territory, but I think we had a live Listener's Corner last week, and that might have kind of paid.
Can't top it. That's just.
I guess that's the problem, isn't it? You know, once you've done something new, we have to pay the price.
You've broken it, Paddy.
Nope.
You've broken the novelty of it.
We'll see what happens next week. Maybe we'll get flooded if we're lucky. Yeah, it's been a pretty nice day for me. The weather's finally turned around, and I work from home today. I've been at a where I'm working for about nearly a year now,
man.
And they've finally let me go home and do one day a week at the home office, as it were.
That's great.
So it's not too bad. It's not quite as nice as you think it is. It's nice having like a commute as a staircase rather than like 2 trains across London. But
I hope you're a bit more efficient than the actual home office.
Yeah, I just realised that I said home office in a slightly ambiguous way. Yeah, I'm not working at the home office, but hopefully, as you mentioned, I am more efficient than them. So yeah, it's been good, and it's nice to just kind of, I feel a little bit more ready for the podcast now. As often I'm just sort of straight in from work and onto the podcast after dinner, so it's now a little bit more leisurely, and we can hopefully extend the analysis if possible.
Yeah, just ease into it.
Yeah.
Speaking of which, I take it we're going to dance a little bit around our weekly Game of Thrones viewing.
This will be the last time we ever dance around Game of Thrones on the show for people who don't enjoy this segment. As I believe next week we're taking a little break, aren't we?
Yeah, we're not here next week. That's true.
Which is also the last week of Game. So
yeah,
sorry,
we
guys.
Probably have forgotten about it by then. So.
The good thing about HBO is they're marrying up. Going straight from Game of Thrones into True Detective Season 2. So we'll be able to dance around a different show.
Yeah.
So I don't think much will change. We might have some slightly different comments to make, but they're not going to be of any substance.
We're unashamedly indulging ourselves in that bit, to be fair.
Yeah.
I suppose there are people that must listen to the show and watch some of the same shows and will understand. Probably some that understand the Game of Thrones ones.
Yeah, but I mean,
it is shamelessly indulgent.
It's completely for our benefit. I'm sorry, guys. So without further ado, shall we discuss Game of Thrones, Alex.
It's become a completely different podcast now. Okay.
Yeah.
So it was. I didn't find it as memorable for some reason. I only watched it very recently. I watched it twice actually. I mean, they have a sort of bit of shock value going on at the beginning,
And in the middle, and in the end.
Yeah, I mean, it's it kind of became a little bit. Something about it became a little bit Star Wars. I don't know, near the end, don't you think?
Are you talking about Geonosis?
Yeah, it suddenly became like really Hollywood-esque. Something about the scene really they did the same thing in the last episode. The last episode as well, where it's really starting to feel quite Hollywood-like. Something about it feels bigger than a TV show. I'm not sure entirely how I feel about that.
The scale is going up.
Yeah.
But it has to be done with like the same brains as the rest of the show did. And last week
I don't think it's dumbed down. I don't think it's dumbed down at all.
I mean, last week it certainly wasn't. I feel this week it didn't feel quite as genuine. There was something. Obviously, we can't talk about the factions, but there was the way the fight went down this week. It didn't quite feel logical. There was a few too many people not killing the people that they should have been killing when they had many opportunities to do so, and all this sort of logic holes that plague a lot of fights. But,
yeah, you're absolutely right. That's one of the things that contributes to its sort of filmic feel. I think is those sort of creative liberties taken with action scenes, and in order to sort of have a sense of scale, but also be able to move the plot on nice and neatly. Which is sometimes hard to avoid when you're doing something, when it's that big and it's involving that many factions and that many people on screen at once. But you're right, that is contributing somewhat to a more filmic feel. And it's good because it's creating a sense of spectacle. It's definitely sort of bigged up on that as a show, without losing too much of its more interesting, intimate scenes. But the sense of scale is, like you say, causing a few more flaws in terms of how characters act, the decisions that certain characters make that seems, contravening to what we understand about their character. That's about as I have to be that vague, unfortunately. But
no, I think people will. Anyone who's on, the Game of Thrones hype, as many TV watchers are, they'll be with us on this. So, I completely agree. Really, it's certainly feels like season 5 is a different breed. It feels like the first 4 that came, where it had some sort of consistency to them, and they're now really, really engaging with that big budget and making it go places. So we'll see what happens next week. I'm sure that they've got a good resolution ready for us, but it's kind of scary how quickly the season went by.
I only have a very minor understanding of the wider implications of the show on its community, but it seems like there's quite a lot of people that are suddenly very vocal about quite shocking events in the show that certain characters commit. And I think that there's a bit of memory loss amongst those people, because Game of Thrones is quite consistently shocking. There's a lot of sort of really horrible things going on in every single episode. Without fail, there is something that will make you squirm or make you sort of be like, that's just horrible or disgusting or really hateful, And all of the characters are meant to be really deeply flawed and entrapped within this world of violence. I guess it kind of shares, in a strange way, it shares that with The Wire, I think, in the fact that it shows all these people in a world where they can't escape all of this violence and treachery. It's just unavoidable. Yeah. And it's like they're institutionalized in it. It kind of shares that to some extent in terms of its themes. And I don't think it does it very outwardly, but it's a sense that I get from the show, that all of the characters are inevitably quite horrible people. There isn't a single genuinely, completely pure soul among them, because that in certain situations they're going to do what they have to do to survive, and it's not necessarily going to be very nice. Westeros and the surrounding places are really cruel areas to live. None of it is particularly rosy.
Yep, everyone's a killer in that show, and you have to be, otherwise you're a dead man yourself. So,
and places that seem nice are always a front for something more sinister.
Yeah, definitely.
Without fail, anyway, we're like, oh, this is quite a nice spot. No, just as bad as everywhere else, just in a different way.
Yeah, it's completely a very depressing show. Mainly, I mean, this
so
week
bleak, isn't it?
We had really conversations about paedophilia, and it really is, yeah. And just all sorts of, every week there seems to be a new shock card that's pulled out, as you mentioned. I mean, this week we had conversations about paedophilia and incest and infanticide by fire and all sorts of crazy stuff going down. So
And just in the fight scenes are really brutal as well. They don't hold back on the fight scenes. There's a lot of decapitations, serious maimings, people getting body parts removed forcibly. Like it's really, really heavy stuff.
Yeah. Oh, definitely.
So I think that when people make a major outcry about some element in the show that some character has committed, I'm a bit confused by that, because the show is very consistently brutal in all, like, really kind of sexually explicit stuff and everything. Like, it's very consistently quite, adult in its themes. And
Definitely,
in its shock value. It kind of pulls these trump cards, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, this season and last season, there have been two big rape events that have caused a huge outcry.
It's a very popular theme in the show.
It seems to be a theme that they keep going back to. And I think a lot of people are criticising them for not necessarily drawing from the source material for that and just putting it in for whatever reason they want to. Or
hey, it gets people talking. We're doing it right now.
Yeah.
We're contributing to the very thing that keeps the show popular.
Exactly. So it knows its audience and it's doing its job. And I'm happy for it to continue the way it is. Like, it's certainly keeps it unique and really quite edgy, I think. So
it's strange how you do wonder when things become quite controversial, shall we say, and when we start breaking all these taboos and things becoming more acceptable on television. I mean, you couldn't even consider a show like Game of Thrones being out and being mainstream, being really popular, say 20 years ago. I can't imagine it being as popular. It was really quite... I'm maybe not old enough to actually remember all of the older telly so much, but I don't know, there does seem to be a general trend where popular TV is a lot more accepting of quite adult themes these days.
It feels
you do wonder if how much desensitization is involved. Like, maybe you don't realise that the effect that it has on people, but then I guess the jury is out on what effect it has. So
yeah, absolutely. It does feel like there's been a constant liberalisation of kind of telly, and as you mentioned, not that we've lived through much of television's history, but I just get that impression from the way history is placed, and not to say that censorship has gone down. I mean, the organisations like the BBFC and what's the American one, the MCAA or something like that. They're still really censoring things, but the things that do go under the censors, such as HBO, like HBO do have that different ground stance in the TV world, where they can just show what they want, and they keep on pushing boundaries, and people seem to really respond to it and watch it. So I'm happy to be reviewing their shows, really.
Well, speaking of adult themes, there's more than enough of those in The Wire.
Yep, plenty this week.
Yeah, lots of stuff going on.
Plenty to dig up in the recap.
Yeah, I suggest we move on, unless there's anything else you'd like to talk about before we start.
No, I think we've danced enough around plot points. Let's get to some real ones.
Yeah, ones we can talk about.
Yeah. All right, so this week we have, as always, a number of sections. We've got the Western District, we've got Homicide, which involves a lot of Omar as well. We've got Politics, we've got the Barksdale Organisation, we've got Cutty, we've got the Stanfield Crew, we've got the Major Case Unit, which is our main big meaty section where most of the action goes down. So let's kick off with the Western District, as the episode does as well, and we have 4 little mini sections here. So firstly, Officers Lloyd, Garrick and Herc watch over corners in the Western District. Major Bunny Colvin and Lieutenant Dennis Mello check up on their level of activity. They are observed by Slim Charles and Avon Barksdale. Slim Charles tells Avon that Marlo has withdrawn his operation from all of his corners, and Avon orders him to take the corners as soon as the police leave. As they drive away, Herc recognises Avon but cannot remember his surname and is surprised he is out so quickly. So we have our opening scene here.
It's interesting that Herc barely remembers Avon. I imagine most of the other members of the detail would spot him and be like, know him instantly and be really shocked, whereas although he is a bit surprised, it kind of shows the perspective that he had on the detail when it was happening. It's interesting that the show shows us that Herc wasn't really directly as involved or as emotionally involved as, say, McNulty or Gregg. So it seems like they would have really, really been a lot more shocked at that.
Yeah, it's like the most temporary frustration you can imagine, isn't it? It's just, all right, he's out, that's annoying, but I kind of want my pit beef from the market, so let's go and get it. Yeah, so it's, it's just kind of a platform for him as well. I locked him up is all. That's kind of what he takes from what happened to Avon. And the consequences aren't important. He might be back now, a year, maybe just under 2 years later, but I want points for doing so. Now he's out, so what?
Yeah, if somebody tells me that I have to go and bust his head again, then I'll do it. But otherwise, he doesn't feel any kind of moral responsibility to find out what's gone on there and discover the injustice like McNulty would.
No, absolutely, yeah. It's you can see when he drops it in passing later on at the bookend of the episode. Actually, it's a real different story on the other side on the MCU.
Yeah, I mean, the episode ends with the outburst of their frustration.
Yeah.
It's it's such an important point in the show for the rest of the characters, and for Herc, it begins right at the beginning with Herc just being like, whatever.
I lucked his ass up.
And it ends with the alternative. It's a nice way to bookend the episode, really.
Yeah, it's very nicely done. And it's nice that Herc only believes that Lloyd Garrick is only thinking like police when he wants to find the preferred lunch option. Pit beef from the market is the police's preferred choice. So it was pretty kind of messed up interpretation of policing there. And we also learn a lot about Avon's view on the street as well from this scene. Mainly a lot of underestimating Marlo, because Marlo makes a big point in this episode that he's moved his people off the street temporarily. And Avon takes this as a real confidence boost and a time to pack our people into the corners. The police are also scaling down the operation around the kind of borders of the Amsterdam. Now they're kind of moving people onto doing real police work. So at the moment, the climate is really there for Avon to start doing his corner boy stuff again. He I think is he with Slim Charles in this scene where he chats about that stuff?
Yeah, he is. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. So we see him that, and they do drive past the cops, and Avon does seem to want to make it clear to them that he's back on the street. He's not too subtle about showing his face. I quite like the way he handles that scene, where he just kind of very slyly does look at them, but doesn't quite look at them as he goes by, just to make it clear that maybe he doesn't want to be back in jail, but he does want them, the police to know of him, know his power on the street, and this guy's defined by people's opinions of him. So.
I mean, he was determined to come out of prison with the same reputation, if not greater, than he went in with.
Definitely. So it's good to see him kind of playing it that way. And as he drives past, Herc doesn't even remember his name. Avon, what's his face? That's all he is to him. So didn't really make the point he wanted to, I think, there, unfortunately, Avon.
So yeah, that's about it. That's seen those kind of two little sections there.
Yeah.
Avon returning and Herc's complete kind of very passe look at it.
Very Herc look at it, yeah. Alright, so we move on to Colvin, quick section with Colvin where he discusses statistics with Mello and the community relations sergeant. Crime is down overall, but near the tolerance zones it's up. Mello thinks this is reason to let the bosses know what they are doing is working, but Colvin insists that it should be kept a secret.
So this is another good show of character here with Colvin. We see his dedication and his conviction in not jumping on that stats drop. Almost any other commander would jump at the chance to have this stats drop and present him to rules with all the balls busting going on.
Yeah.
But we see that Bunny is a bit more on the straight with his plan. And he wants to actually he wants to be certain that his idea is working. He wants to see kind of long term. We see that in his the way that he approaches the results and approaches the stats.
Yeah, because
it's kind of like an ideal for, in a way, it is kind of an idealistic presentation for how things could be if they were managed properly.
Exactly. I mean, he's put so much effort into this that he's not going to take any risks with the operation, and he's very happy to dismiss it as a statistical aberration, as he puts it. So yeah, he's going to wait around. But in some ways, I mean, it's worse that he waits around because he waits until crime drops genuinely 14% and then decides to drop the bombshell on the department, which I don't think did him any favours at all in terms of maintaining his pension as he leaves. So
you can see his logic behind it, though. I mean, 14% is obviously like a big drop. in whatever amount of time it was, presumably not that long.
Yeah.
So I guess he was thinking that if he could get something really kind of, a serious number decreased, then that would somehow strengthen his case and the legitimacy of what he's trying out.
I think the other thing is, if they do find out about Amsterdam, which seems pretty likely, I mean, it's amazing that it's gone unnoticed this long, to be honest. If they do find out, that can be his leverage. You should keep this because look at my crime stats. I've got 14%. I don't want to play that card too early. So, and that's certainly what he tries to do later on.
It shows, or maybe it doesn't, I'm not sure, but it kind of shows in some way how they don't really have a lot of eyes on the street the higher up things go. I mean, it's quite a major operation, and you've got a large amount of drug trafficking moving to these really concentrated areas, and all of these neighborhoods suddenly becoming a lot calmer and quieter. But because these stats are kind of kept within the district, they can keep the people up top ignorant about that. It seems strange that they would willfully put themselves in a position where they're not keeping an eye on the street to that level. But then again, on the other hand, when you're at that level of command, maybe it's just simply not possible. You just got too many other things to do.
Yeah, I mean, it's just incredible as well that it's not even reported to the department. Like, there's just no residents and no.
You think word of mouth, it would eventually kind of.
Yeah, people would phone up the local government and they'd report this sort of thing. But it just shows you how few residents and how few visitors this place has, apart from those who are involved directly in its illegal activities. And it really is a real story of segregation and just being completely cut off from the rest of the urban city. So. It really is quite incredible. I'm not sure if I can believe it entirely, but I can certainly see how the show has made it convincing in their own way. And it's cool to see there's that stats cop that only seems to turn up for these conversations about the stats, whose role is there to kind of perhaps duke the stats normally, but in this case actually monitor them and do the rest of it. So it's nice to see him.
The community relations sergeant?
That's it, yeah.
Yeah, so, I don't know his name.
Yeah,
don't know if he has a name.
He just turns up for these moments, and so we have larceneries and burglaries that are steady, and then we have shootings and aggravated assaults and drug arrests down. Although drug arrests is kind of what should be going up as far as the bosses are concerned. So for them, it's importantly decriminalising those drug arrests that makes them do better with the crime that more directly hurts people. And we're seeing
so bizarre, isn't
it?
Such a bizarre concept.
Yeah.
You have to reach this many arrests. No kind of question of, are there this many crimes? It's just, there has to be this many arrests.
Yeah.
Very strange way of looking at it.
Arrests is a response to crime, at the most basic level of looking at it. So, you can see why it works for the sake of the media and the stats game. But on the as far as that goes, I mean, that certainly is the side of the episode that shows the positives of Amsterdam. I think the episode does far more to demonstrate the negatives, actually. We will come to that next, actually.
All right.
So, Bubbles tries to sell his t-shirts in Amsterdam, but finds the area overwhelmingly even by his standards. He learns that addicts have taken up residence in the vacant buildings and need basic supplies to get by. Bubbles spots Johnny in one of the houses. Johnny is looking worse for wear but refuses to leave. A fight breaks out and the uniformed officers break it up. Herc and Colicchio refuse to help Carver. Carver tells the Hoppers that they are breaking Amsterdam's only rule, no violence, as Bubbles watches.
So this is quite a surreal scene with Bubbles. He sees this nightmare of addiction, and that even for someone as seasoned to the world of the dope fiend as Bubbles, we see how horrified he is by it, and something about the complete lack of street lights and this weird, almost apocalyptic feel to the scene. It's quite stylized. There's a lot of bits in slow motion and bits where the audio is kind of intentionally made to be quite disorienting. It's I really, really enjoyed this scene, actually. I thought it was quite an interesting little trip with Bubbles through Amsterdam. It showed us this real harsh side to it. This real, it's just really dilapidated.
Yeah, but there was something a little bit otherworldly about it, wasn't it? And I think the lack of street lighting is certainly a good point that kind of contributes towards that, and it's just him kind of slowly taking his white tea business through these streets, and we're starting to see the place depicted as hell, I guess. I mean, you know, just some sort of awful little hive, and this is, of course, whilst we're seeing that the rest of the city is better than before, these designated areas are absolute hives of awfulness, and do they really justify those increased crime stats?
Well, that's what the show masterfully doesn't do, is that it doesn't try to say, look how wonderful this is and look how horrible that is, and then pick a side. It literally just presents it as it is. It's kind of quite very skillfully done, without having too many characters being very sort of extreme with their opinions in order for the show as a whole to kind of press these opinions on the viewer.
Yeah, definitely. So, I mean, it's good to see that, and the place is absolutely lawless, and it's there's some pretty horrible stuff going on. There's a lot of kids who are just hanging around. A lot of people trying to sell stuff, and this is also where Bubs manages to find, you know, some inspiration for, as you were mentioning before, Bub's Depot, where it's more of a diverse shop, really, and he realizes that people have more needs than just white teas. And I think, does someone demand some candles or something like that? There's some sort of demand.
Well, it's their only form of light. There's no electricity, is there? We see in quite a few of the scenes that there's just a load of candles all over the tables, and you know, people lighting fires in bins or whatever. You know, it's a really bleak. Like I say, you know, apocalyptic is almost the word I would use to describe it. It just looked really, really, really run down, and
that really takes it back to the Dark Ages, doesn't it? Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, well, literally.
Yeah. So.
And we see a very quite scary depiction of Johnny as well, who seems completely out of it. Like, he doesn't even seem to know like where he is, or seems barely lucid in his stupor. Yep.
So, if that's what he wants to pursue, that's what he's pursuing, and Amsterdam gives him a good platform for it. So we're certainly going to see, if the crime goes down, perhaps the death rate will still go up. These people aren't getting murdered, but they're finding it much easier to overdose.
Yeah, it's saturation, isn't it?
Yeah. So it's a real. The episode really starts to, you know, pick apart the Amsterdam idea and the pros and cons quite heavily here, and it's really nice to see that being done in such a kind of visual scene. Really, there's not much chat here at all. It's just completely portrayed through Johnny's whimperings and noises and chants, and then just lots and lots of just kind of running around. It's a pretty awful depiction here, really.
Yeah.
And we see the police are still there. They are watching all of this, but they are having to turn a blind eye in line with Colvin's instructions. It's not just drug transactions they're turning their eyes to now. It's, you know, prostitution, extreme drunkenness, starvation going on. And it's just, you know, it's pretty horrible. You know, Carver's really struggling here. The episode really makes a big point that he's morally struggling to stomach a lot of this stuff, particularly when the kids are getting involved. And it's pretty jarring to see that the police only arrive to do something when a small scuffle breaks out, because they're breaking that violence rule. In the meantime, everything else goes. So,
yeah. They're trying to harken back to some kind of more community relations-based policing, where people know their officers on the beat, and it's not just about going to these areas to bang corner boys sort of thing. But all this does is make them police of this completely broken place. There's no kind of community policing that they can do. There's no working with the people they can do. They're supposed to just stand there and look at it, like you say. Oh, a bit of violence, sorry, that's not on. Yeah. But all these other things are totally okay. It must be very hard for them to take.
Yeah.
And we can see that Carver is very conflicted in this, because he clearly respects Buddy, and he clearly is beginning to develop a greater hunger to sort of do the right thing, as it were.
Yeah.
But this is creating a bit of dissonance for him, clearly.
Definitely, indeed, yeah. So, should we go on to that now? That's what Section 4 is all about.
Yeah.
So, Carver and Herc take over from Colicchio and Truck on watch in Amsterdam. Carver remarks that there are too many children, and Colicchio tells Carver that many of them are unemployed, as lookouts and runners are not needed if trade is legal. Carver tells the dealers that they have to pay $100 a week to deal in Amsterdam, with the money going towards supporting the young children. Carver uses the first of the cash to buy a basketball ring for the children. Colvin visits Amsterdam at night, and Carver tells him he would be okay with it if there weren't so many children involved. So that's a great kind of logical development in terms of the drug trade in Amsterdam, is the idea that a lot of these roles don't need, to be filled anymore. There's this layoff of people, just cost cutting, really getting rid of the lookouts, who are done by the bottom feeders, the start outs, the kids, and they're now just running around trying to find something constructive to do with themselves, and getting caught up in the mix with all this awful illicit activity. So it's a pretty nice development that you feel a lot of the shows might have glossed over, but Carver takes it upon himself to try and get a basketball game set up there, which doesn't go too well. We see it the next day completely trashed and graffitied over. But
another thing that Carver does that's is very much a leaf out of Colvin's book, making an action like introducing that tax, as it were.
Yeah.
Tax incentive, and bringing in a rule change like that without telling anyone above, like just going for it, making that change. He already knows that it's a system based on, essentially spontaneity, and it's not exactly through anyone's approval other than Bunny's.
Yeah.
He's kind of taking a leaf out of his book there.
And he gets one of the crew chiefs to buy or to cover the cost of a basketball net, doesn't he, I think?
Yeah.
And so it's all sorts of tax they have to pay to cover all this kiddie badness going on. So yeah, it's nice to see that, and it feels like a real change for Carver. The first time he really displays a conscience that actually is fighting against something. And it feels refreshingly of the new Carver that we're seeing in season 3. This is really his transition season.
Yeah, he's starting to, like I say, I think having Colvin in here and showing that emphasis of their relationship and how he clearly respects him and gets this idealistic spur, which, as you say, really gets into motion in this season.
Yeah, and he does a good job of following through with it, even if Herc does call it communism. But it's, again, we can kind of see how they're really heading off in different directions at this point.
Yeah, it's quite extreme very mild. I mean, it's very, very mild for communism.
Yeah. But we do see that once the B-ball arrives, fun just isn't allowed in this climate of pain and suffering, and it very quickly ends up on its arse, covered in graffiti.
Yeah, it's really depressing.
Yeah.
Again, another very bleak sort of outlook, and it's hard to know what to make of it as well. He provided this thing for the kids, and they've gone and destroyed it, or somebody's gone and destroyed it.
Yep.
And frustrating to feel like even when you do try to do good in this world, it's so corrupted that there's just nothing that could even touch it.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, if a kid is brought up in Amsterdam, then I guess it makes sense that they'd rather attack the B-ball post than actually play with it. So it's it's a real. There's some more change that's required here. There needs to be some kind of human intervention, and that is eventually what starts happening once it becomes a bit more of a known thing in the city. Okay.
Yeah, well, it's something that comes up in season 4, isn't it? Where they delve in a little bit more into the kids and almost getting them to ask themselves, what do you want to do?
Mm.
In this kind of environment, what is it that you do want to do? So that's explored more later on in the show.
Yeah. Okay, so that covers the Western District. So let's quickly do a couple of short homicide sections. So, firstly, Omar visits Butchie to discuss Bunk's recent lecture about the loss of morality in the neighbourhood. He reveals that he has been feeling guilty, and Butchie says that this is a ploy that Bunk is using against him. Despite Butchie's advice, Omar cannot put his conscience to rest. He uses Butchie's contacts to locate Dozerman's weapon for Bunk.
Guilty, Omar.
A real slump season for him, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah.
So Bunk's words have cut him deep, and Butchie really is just saying here that this is how the game is played. Everyone does things, they're doing what they got to do. It's part of his job. He has to find ways to guilt trip people into, finding information. That's what Bunk does, and you really get a sense while watching this that Butchie is vying for the show's wisest character prize. He really does. Everything he says really does seem to be laced in this Western District wisdom that he's just lived here for so long knows how the streets work. He's always a pleasure to listen to, I find, Butchie. And it's a little bit like listening to someone like Tyrion in Game of Thrones, I find. He always seems to know the right kind of wisdom to inject into the conversation just to make you go, wow, you really do have a perspective there, sir.
I'm tempted to say that Butchie has seen it all, but then maybe that wouldn't be appropriate.
Whoa, yeah. Blind Butchie. I think he makes that his own sort of gag about that later on when Bunk pays a visit to him. So.
Yeah, he's certainly not ashamed to make a joke about it.
No. Hearing is believing. So yeah, is there anything else to say about that?
It's not quite explained how. Well, it's not sort of fully delved into as to how Omar gets hold of Doberman's weapon. There's not a lot of emphasis put on how he goes about that. So he just suddenly comes up with it and knows that it's the right one somehow, and and gets it returned. So Bunk gets what he wants.
Yeah, I guess that speaks to Butchie's long-standing connection with the street. He seems to know everyone and has the right contacts, I guess. You'd have thought it might be a bit of a lone ranger who just stole it for himself, but clearly, I guess, anyone who's with an organised drug crew reports to someone quite high up, and Butchie seems to know a number of the drug connects within the district, I guess. If he
it's fortunate that it even, it would even hang around that long. Someone might have thrown it somewhere unreachable. They're always throwing guns down storm drains and the like in The Wire.
Yeah. And
so it's, in a way, it's surprising that it's even lasted that long.
Yeah, I guess, it was a Glock 7, was it, or something like that? Some sort of... it could easily be another Glock 7. I don't know if there's any way they could identify it as Doberman's, but...
Presumably it'll have some kind of serial number on it, and that'll be traceable to being ownership of the Baltimore Police Department.
Yeah. Yeah, may very well be the case. But yeah, I certainly agree that it just comes out of this blanket, doesn't it? This prodigal gun.
Isn't it wrapped in a tie?
That might be it then, yeah.
Yeah, it's like wrapped in a tie, and then Bunk gives it back to Butchie and says, he wants to see Omar wearing it next time he's in court.
Mm. And that, of course, marries up quite nicely with the other homicide scene where we are introduced to the tie cutting tradition of the office.
Yeah. And first appearance of Crutchfield.
That's right. Should we quickly move on to that now? So,
yeah, let's do it.
Bunk cuts Detective Crutchfield's tie as part of a running joke in the homicide unit. Detectives sleeping in the offices have their ties cut in half. He gets a call from Butchie and travels to his bar. Butchie gives Bunk the weapon wrapped in Omar's tie from his court appearance in the Bird trial. Bunk returns the tie and asks Butchie to tell Omar he is hoping he might need the tie in court someday. So we've kind of already discussed some of this stuff, just kind of completing it for the homicide section. And yeah, as you say, is it Michael Crutchfield, I believe? He is another of the detectives, sort of the vein of Vernon Holley and Ed Norris, who pop up now and then, are fairly prominent characters, and they're kind of the camaraderie in the homicide office for Bunk to play off, really. And they cover a lot of the cases when he's not around, so it's good to see another one. And he's been referenced quite a few times so far in the show, but just hasn't been casted yet until now. So yeah,
he has quite a larger role in season 5, doesn't he, with Bunk?
I do. Yeah, he gets really pissed off. Doesn't I think it might be season 4. It's actually when Crutchfield pretty much nails Omar as a perpetrator in one of his murder cases, and Bunk has to let him off, get him out of jail free, to do with the previous... Remember, he was given that card for testifying against Bird by Eileen Nathan, that gets him out of anything up to a minor aggravated assault or something like that.
Yeah, it's he has him as a murder suspect for... is it Old Face Andre?
Old Face Andre, that's it, yeah. Yeah, our memory's gradually getting about there, but I think that's what happens. They have a...
Bunk wants to re-examine it because he has to, protect Omar. He wants to, stall him on it, basically, because he has to protect Omar because of his deal with him about a man must having a code.
Yeah.
So yeah, Crutchfield gets pissed off about that. So he kind of features a bit more in season... Yeah, you're right. I think it is season 4, yeah.
Season 4. And of course, we know that Omar never committed that murder. He was set up by Chris, so I think Bunk was just trying to take a little bit more time to convince Crutchfield that he's found the right man, and it's not Omar.
Yeah.
So yeah, it does cause a lot of friction, and I think Crutchfield never sees Bunk in the same way after that. But they're clearly having a lot of fun with their tie tradition, which is introduced here as well. And this is, I believe, a true thing that happens in the Baltimore Homicide Office, as chronicled by David Simon in his homicide, sort of autobiography, semi-novel. So, yeah, it's good to see that, all those little details coming in.
Quite unconvincing sleeping, but...
yeah, that's true. Worst snoring in the world.
But yeah, otherwise, it's nice to see the little tradition played out for real.
Yeah.
And, a nice little connection to ties, seeing obviously Doberman's gun is wrapped in a tie, so...
Yeah, definitely. So he's giving back everything that he ever took off the police. The tie and the gun. Not that he took it himself, but he does want some real penance for his guilt, and I guess, giving these things back is his way towards doing that. So yeah, it's overall a really humanizing segment for Omar here. Up until now, he's been fairly hyper-real, I'd say. He's been untouchable, both physically and emotionally. And Season 3, I've forgotten really how much of a slump it was for Omar. And ever since they have that big shootout, I think it's in episode 2 or 3, he really has just been moping and popping up now and then to become, more depressed and get it out of his system. So it's a bit of a different vibe for Omar this season.
Yeah, an important change as well.
Yeah,
because I feel like if it had continued in the same streak and just it would be Omar the Untouchable all the time, that in sort of reference to the rest of the show, it would feel a bit out of place and might get a bit fatiguing. Just having a character that's constantly untouchable, and like you say here, it humanises him, it puts him in a difficult position. We see more of his troubles and the way that he deals with his guilt, and the way that, as Bunk points out, there is an argument that he's still just as bad as everyone else. He's still doing killing, and he's still involved in the drug war, just in a different way. So it's isn't it refreshing change for Omar, and it allows for a slightly different arc from then on, without otherwise constantly trying to build him up and up and up, and trying to get this kingpin thing going on.
Yep, definitely. Okay, so that's homicide. Let's quickly move on to politics. This is just one section here. So Carcetti asks Burrell about the witness protection program, or lack thereof. Carcetti verifies that Mayor Clarence Royce has not acted on his request to look into the death of a witness, and assures Burrell he will keep his name out of it. Later he meets with Terry D'Agostino, his new campaign manager, at his home. Terry convinces Carcetti that rather than taking the story of Royce's inaction to the papers, it is better to meet with him again, and if he still fails to act, he can document his concern in a letter and save the story for a time close to the primaries, when it will hurt the mayor more, or when the next witness is killed. Carcetti therefore meets with Royce to discuss starting a witness protection program a second time. Royce claims there is no money available for any such initiative. Royce and Burrell hold a press conference to return Doberman's service weapon. Bunk, Jay Landsman, Raymond Forster and William Rules are also in attendance. As the ceremony goes on, Carcetti types his letter of concern.
So starting with Carcetti finding out that he's been bumped yet again, and as a result he starts to learn a little bit more about the game in politics from D'Agostino, who's clearly very experienced in this sort of thing and understands how to put your opponents in compromising positions with certain types of information.
Yep, play it against them. No, it's very good, and I think the first section here is really when he catches Burrell sort of leaving work at the City Hall, trying to make it look very accidental, but he's really glancing at his watch on the way there, and timing this apparent arrival to try and catch Burrell, getting his private SUV on the way home to the suburbs. So he's... I think Burrell's surprisingly cooperative here, really, considering how Carcetti's had a habit of throwing him under the bus at every opportunity. And you get the sense that Burrell really wants Royce out as much as Carcetti does. With him, really explaining to him that he's done nothing about the witness. If that's not going behind your boss's back, I don't know what is.
Well, I don't think Burrell's a big fan of Royce either. I mean,
No.
Royce is just constantly in a permanent state of dissatisfaction with him.
Yeah.
So it's not exactly an enjoyable relationship for him.
Yeah. So Burrell knows just as much that he's losing loyalty and he's being overly pressured. So it's good to see that. It's good to see that despite how much he must absolutely despise Carcetti, he, is in the interest of him of going behind his boss's back to help him out. So
it does, render a little bit null what he says to Carcetti when he first has a conversation with him, when he talks very self-righteously about understanding chain of command and loyalty, and then after a while he breaks. He doesn't really stick to that for too long.
Yeah, I mean, he's probably been keeping his head in the politics circle, and it's been no secret so far that since the season has started, Royce's support base has really dropped, and there's doubts cast over his next election win. So I guess he's really thinking like Carcetti that this guy may well want to take his place, and it may well do me well to get in his good books so that I can maintain my job for next time. So I think you can see lots of cogs whirring here in both their brains. None of which are being discussed, of course, but it's nice to see kind of all the things going on underneath.
Yeah, so moving on to Royce, obviously he's meeting with Carcetti proper.
Yeah.
He's just kind of giving him another story, feels like. Certainly there's these moments after we have these meetings and he always has to sort of share a look with, is it Coleman Parker?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, he has to sort of share a look with him that makes the scene that little bit more ambiguous. So kind of, were they telling the truth? Yeah.
Yeah.
So that happens again here with Carcetti. He gives him this story about there just not being any available money and that he's not able to reallocate any more than he already has. It sounds plausible, but based on what we know about the politics system and all this money dealing going around it seems a lot more unbelievable to our eyes.
Mm. It's weird because it's not quite the answer that Carcetti was obviously hoping for. He was hoping for another I'll push you out of the office, we'll deal with it, don't you worry, sir. But there seems to be quite a degree of honesty here, and Royce has obviously chosen to answer it this way to try and get Carcetti on his side and explain. Explains, makes some very good points. If we devote resources to witnesses, then we have to remove them from somewhere else, and it's not you making those decisions, it's me, and you've got to respect me for doing that sort of thing. So it's good to see that, and he really foreshadows a lot of the financial predicaments that Carcetti himself will experience down the line, particularly when he mentions the few friends they have in Annapolis. The governor particularly just isn't on Baltimore's side. So yeah, it's good for Carcetti, but not as outwardly a denial as he was hoping for the maximum ammunition come the election time.
Well, Royce is smart enough to know to placate him and not to be making any enemies at this stage. I'm not sure how aware he is of his sort of decreasing popularity, but he knows enough to not be making enemies of people and trying to push his luck too far. He's just trying to give a perfectly, on the face of it, reasonable explanation to Carcetti to, like you say, reinforce the fact that they're on the same side and he wants it as much as Carcetti does, and that should be enough to send him out the door and hopefully not see him again.
Yeah, it's certainly a much better attempt than last time.
Yeah, who's basically just like, don't you worry about that. Pat him on the back and thanks for coming.
Yeah, the I'm not fooling anyone approach. Yeah, it's pretty ridiculous. So it's nice to see that. It's certainly a much more kind of tactful play, I think.
I mean, you think if that were the case, it's a little bit, in a way, it's a bad move to have then moved to that straight after, because based on the first meeting, you'd think that if it was so obvious that there just wasn't any money, that was something he could have said in the first place.
Yeah.
So I think Carcetti knows what's going on. So
yep, bang on. So that just leaves us with the Terry bit, which we haven't discussed in full, I guess. But he, it's nice that Terry kind of tells him what Carcetti's been denying all along, to make his intentions feel more noble and genuine. He tells him that you want Royce to be disappointed, and that you have to be self-righteous to run in this game, and bringing him back to the politics, and that nothing is changed without pulling a few dirty strings here. And she, as you were mentioning, she really is the expert of that. She's done it many times before.
Yeah, there's a very institutionalized sense to the world of politics, of course. and the fact that everyone's stuck in this world where you do have to beat your chest a little bit and, like you say, be self-righteous, make these big grandstanding attempts to assassinate people's characters for the sake of leveraging your own power. It's just inevitable in the system. And she's just explaining that to Carcetti. This is you are this way for a reason.
Yep.
He almost seems a bit offended by the suggestion.
Yeah, it's like he's been in denial the whole time, even though it's been really obvious, really, to anyone who's thought about it. So, yeah, he does seem a bit wounded, and it's nice that they use Jen as the real voice of conscience here, as Terry suggests that withholding this information, these big cards till later in the primary, this possibly does mean a witness will get killed, and you can use that as your next ammunition because you didn't take action now. And Jen Carcetti really does decry the blood on the hands that will come because of that. And again, it's just the wire putting forward some conflicting arguments so that we're able to make our own minds up, really.
That's true. In the same way that Jen is an unfortunate, innocent party with Carcetti and whoever it is that he's dealing with the politics, she's kind of very much not involved. She feels like it always seems like she's a little bit stuck in the middle of whatever is going on in Carcetti's life and who he's dealing with. Certainly seems like it's that way here with D'Agostino. But in the same way that she is that unfortunate, innocent party, she sort of speaks out for the other unfortunate party in this whole campaign race, which is the witness.
Yeah. And
the fact that they're the one that's stuck in the middle as well. And it's nice that her perspective on that leans into what she thinks of when she hears this conversation.
Yeah, definitely.
So it's very, very nicely written character.
Yeah, definitely. I mean,
even one as minor as Jen, yeah.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, she doesn't have another side to her, does she? You'd have thought that if they spent more time with her, they may well delve into whether she's dissatisfied with Carcetti's kind of careerist focus and a lot of self-righteousness, really. And Jen always seems very content and happy with her home life, and
it's the one really domestic life that is genuinely quite sort of calm and rosy, even though there is a lot of potential for disruption, and there are certainly many events where you could be like, this could cause problems with their relationship. It never really does. It always seems very, very placid and enjoyable for the both of them. No
definitely, I mean, there. She really is the ultimate, campaign wife. That everything is a real peachy situation here. Don't you worry, vote for me. So it's.
Is it ever said what she does?
I think I get the impression that she might be a housewife, really, because she always seems to be at home or with Carcetti at his fundraiser stuff, and she's always there to send him off in the mornings and the rest of it. So, I don't think it ever mentions if she has a career or anything like that, or a job.
Yeah, nothing kind of springs to mind. I guess the last bit of that section that you mentioned was the press conference. And then we see Carcetti typing his letter of concern as per D'Agostino's advice. I don't really have a whole lot to say about that. They're pretty matter-of-fact scenes, really. Yeah,
just marrying up the police's true concerns and true devotions, i.e. Dozeman's gun, with what they should be worrying about, which is this witness protection scheme. Which Carcetti rightfully does want the police to set up, although also doesn't want them to set up because he wants to be the one to bring it in and have the glory for it. So there's all these kind of noble / selfish, motivations getting in the way of things here.
The show doesn't spend any time, presenting whether or not the police go to whatever extent to confirm that it is genuinely Dozeman's weapon. I don't know if it's something that would be immediately obvious, or if they'd have to sort of trace a serial number, and if that would be dead simple, or would they even bother? Would they just be like, yeah, this is the same kind of gun, or yeah, we can show this in a press conference and be like, yep, we found it. Just to kind of be there, because that's what they're doing. They're just doing it to kind of save face and do it on the principle. And if somebody's told them that it's the right gun, then they're willing to accept that because that's the outcome they wanted. Whether or not it's true is perhaps another matter. But like I say, it doesn't go into that at all, so it's merely speculation.
Yeah, I mean, for a department that dukes the stats as much as these guys, you'd have thought it would be an easy thing to fake, like the recovery of the weapon, but maybe that these serial numbers do leave it open to, someone to challenge that, so perhaps they did have to wait for the real thing before anything happened. But yeah, I mean, it may as well have been a fake because, I mean, the falseness behind the actual press conference is ridiculous. So may as well have been. All
Where
right.
are we heading next?
So we're going to head and see the Barksdales for a couple of sections. So Bernard, a new character Bernard, delivers a new batch of disposable phones, burners, to Shamrock at the funeral home. Shamrock asks him to acquire 60 more of them by the end of the week. Bernard sticks to Stringer Bell's rules when buying the phones, getting only 2 from any single outlet. His girlfriend Squeak harasses him about the amount of time they spend travelling to buy the phones. Throughout their lengthy road trip, she continues to try to convince him to buy the phones in bulk. When they deliver the phone, she notices that Shamrock does not even check the documentation. The next time Bernard makes his rounds, his girlfriend convinces him to buy in bulk. Fun little bunch of scenes.
I do think that for the first-time viewer, maybe this is just me, but for the first-time viewer, and I certainly felt this when I first watched it, this set of scenes are a little bit confusing. It's not immediately obvious what's going on. I don't know why, but something about it is a little bit disorienting. I remember the first time I watched it, I didn't quite understand what was going on. But the signs are all there, obviously, watching it now.
Okay.
I don't know if you felt that way.
No, I always thought this was for the Wire standards, quite a clearly spelt out scene, because they'd established that burners were the new breed of phone communication in the ghetto, and that everyone was dumping them after a few calls, and therefore you need lots of new ones. And then they just established Bernard as the guy who goes and gets them. And of course, 2 episodes back, Shamrock showed Stringer Bernard's receipts, and Stringer, checked them and said, make sure that he's never bought more than 2 from one place. Of course, incredible cautiousness here, really, on the part of Stringer, making sure that no one can trace the phones back to the source. And I just found, I think I must have paid attention for that point, and then this was just a continuation of that for me, really, just seeing Bernard in the flesh and doing the job. I guess
it's. I guess I think back to the first time I watched it, because I think it. Maybe not everyone, but I think a lot of people would when they watch The Wire. There may be certain tracks of the plot that you just don't quite pick up on them because you're trying to take in so much at once. There's always certain bits that, for whatever reason, you have a bit of a brain fart and you don't remember that one particular plot, and it only clicks when you watch it again. I guess that's what makes the show good as a rewatch, is that you just pick up all these extra details that flesh out the bits that maybe you didn't quite notice the first time around.
Yeah.
And that was probably one for me, for whatever reason. I just remember the first time I watched it, I don't know why, but I found it such a disorienting set of scenes. Maybe, like you say, because it is so spelt out like that. The rest of the show is you're always looking for ambiguities and trying to analyse something deeper in the scene, whereas this was kind of straight up just, they're going to buy phones, and in order to make them go faster, she's going to suck his dick. I mean... It's pretty kind of open about it.
It's a pretty funny relationship, those two. It's done very well. But yeah, I mean, as you say, it's a pretty mundane little job that we're seeing here, which is unusual for The Wire, and it's nice to see how the new burner protocol is necessitating a new role for the crew. They have to get rid of their lookouts, but they are now having to employ someone to go and do a burner run for them. And it's good that we get to put a face to Bernard, who has been mentioned a couple of times before as their burner runner. And I do like how no one wants to check the receipts. That they want the receipts to be there out of principle, but no one bothers. Like Stringer, Shamrock showed them to Stringer a couple of episodes ago, and he's like, "Can't be asked, you deal with it." And then Shamrock deals with it, and he's just like, "Okay, there's lots of receipts here. Let's put them in the bin." I'm convinced. So Squeak's clearly in there to try and find the weakness so that they can get their job done quicker. Bernard starts off going to 30 different shops to get 60 phones, even refusing special offers to make sure that the receipts say exactly 2 phones. So he really is doing his job down to the T at the moment.
Yeah, he's certainly doing it on that principle.
Yeah, definitely.
But in the end is tempted. So.
Yeah, I don't think we outwardly see it, but I assume that Squeak makes an impression on him, convinces him with the bait, as you mentioned. Yeah. So, Shamrock increasingly taking Stringer's old role as he oversees the counting of their stacks in the office. Nice to see how everyone's gradually climbing that ladder in the Barksdale crew.
Not necessarily a good promotion.
No.
Shamrock is sort of not checking what's going on.
Yeah.
With those receipts, for example. He could at least take a quick glance in it get a general feel for it. But nope, nothing going on there. And then Squeak just sees that as an excuse to, here's an excuse for us to do less work.
Yeah, I mean, the stupidest move was making it clear to Bernard that he didn't need the receipts. He
could have waited till he shut the door.
Exactly, yeah. So it should have really just kept him around for a little bit. But it does remind me of the scene in Breaking Bad where Walter White, it tells the new meth dealer in town that he has to go to different shops to buy the ingredients. Otherwise, you're going to attract a bit of a suspicion with a meth shopping cart. But it was quite nice to see that aspect going down. And yeah, just props to Squeak, really. She's wonderfully sassy, and an entire day's journey with this constant nagging. You're really this depiction of hell is working on 2 levels here. And I quite like how they smatter these scenes in between other institutions, so we get a better idea of their really lengthy journey. Like it's taking them all day to do it. So it's quite nice how they're sort of sprinkled over the episode.
Yeah, sort of come back to it every now and again.
Yeah. Okay,
Should we move on to the next bit?
Sure. So Donette discusses Brianna with Stringer over dinner at her apartment. Discussing Brianna meaning Brianna going to the cops about D'Angelo. Brianna asks Donette to go with her to the police station to talk to Jimmy about the death of D'Angelo. Stringer is angry that Donette has spoken to Brianna. He asks her when Brianna plans to visit the police and learns that she is waiting to contact a lawyer. Stringer checks in with Maury Levy and learns that Brianna has contacted him. Levy recommends that they tell Avon, and Stringer says he will handle it. Ooh.
Yeah, so I think the show is going ever so slightly in the direction to try and maybe like dishonorate String a little bit. Whereas before he was kind of built up to be a strangely likeable character in how calculated he was, and the fact that he wanted to make these changes where, although it was colder, it was less based around violence and whatnot, and you could respect him a bit as a character in that. But in this season, because he's getting into a position of greater desperation and we see some of his weaknesses, we also see, he has a bit of an outburst here with Donette, and he just seems to be quite sort of really angry with her. Although he may have a sort of a grievance, it seems like he becomes unnecessarily irate here, and that kind of has an impact on how we perceive that character. So it feels like the show is taking a couple of steps to dishonorate Stringer a little bit, which is, naturally leading up to us feeling somewhat more justified, if you like, in what happens to him with the showdown near the end.
Stringer's certainly making it obvious that he killed D'Angelo here. Like, just so overly defensive, as you say, and it just doesn't feel like a clever move on his part. Like, he should put some efforts in to bury it under the carpet, but you should not really draw too much attention to it. You need to balance it better. I guess you could assume that he's trying to reduce police attention in general, and that's why he's so mad about it, because he's such a perfectionist, but certainly not a good idea to tell one of the 2 people in the organisation who cared about him, Brianna, and of course later Avon will find out. So I can understand why he's angry. And we get to see a bit of Levy again as well. He's been missing recently.
Yeah, he's not really shown up at all.
And I guess the main message we take away from this scene is that Stringer is perhaps losing his influence now that Avon's back on the street. There's this sense that Levy is ultimately loyal to Avon, and he kind of rejects Stringer's request to go and see Brianna about this and to end what's going on with the cops. To put, Levy says nothing can be done. And I'm sure he knows the law well, but there's a sort of dismissal about it. And of course he says, I should tell Avon about this. You're the second in command. My boss is Avon, and Stringer clearly rejects that notion as well and says he'll handle it. So we're starting to see the carpet come up from under his feet a little bit here. The cracks are showing.
Yeah, it's not all quite as well planned out as he might have thought it was.
Yeah. All right, have you got anything else to say about the Barksdales? Or shall we move on?
I think that's about it, really. Just a little bit of the Barksdales here. It's all coming a bit more to a head, especially once this information reaches Avon. But yeah, just a few small bits here, so ready to move on, yeah?
Sure, yeah. So Cutty has his own section again now that he's left the Barksdale fold. And having left the game for good, Cutty reapplies himself to the casual landscaping job he was working before. The crew boss continues to relate to him and convinces him to return to the Deacon. Cutty arranges a second meeting with the Deacon and discusses his state of mind. He tells the Deacon he is tired of doing things he doesn't want to do and wants to change. He asks the Deacon to call him Dennis.
So, following on from Cutty's full realization that the game just isn't in him anymore, he's now going to the other extreme and, sort of denying the whole name that he's been given and really trying to push himself into the landscaping job again. But just a small visit to Cutty, really, this week. Just showing his swing back and the effect that it's had on him since he had to sort of get out from what was going on with the Barksdales.
Yeah, definitely. And there's no in-between, is there? We're thrown straight into a scene with Cutty back at the landscaping job. There's no transition as he moves out of the game. It's kind of makes it clear that he's desperate to go back and get a different kind of satisfaction from life. And he clearly has a different attitude to the work here as well, following his experiences on the other side of the law. It feels like he's forcing himself to be interested by it and sort of making sure that his boss's attempts to play the job down again. Like, he's really not doing a very good job, that boss, of selling his own job. Like, he clearly doesn't think Cutty's cut out for it, or just isn't enjoying it at all. But
he has to remind him to drink, doesn't he? You can see Cutty pushing himself to quite an extreme just to try and, like you say, push himself into being involved with it.
Yeah, because you could see how bored he was last time. His demeanour's completely changed. There's this determination that he's going to get into landscaping and he's going to learn to enjoy it and earn the legitimate dollar. And the guy's just saying, look, I see what you're doing here. I don't think this is right for you. And it seems kind of bad that he's saying that, but maybe we do sense that it comes from somewhere noble and that he understands the streets well enough that this won't satisfy him if he's come from the game. So it's nice to see them chatting again about that sort of thing. And they symbolise that by the priming the equipment sort of metaphor. Like Cutty knows how to prime the equipment now, but he, the guy says that isn't good enough. It's not really for you. So, yeah, interesting to see how that goes down.
And then a small section with the Deacon again. We see a little bit more of his very leading questioning. He's just trying to find out exactly what it is that Cutty is there for. And it feels like Cutty just needs someone to speak to. He just needs to kind of vent this out and talk about the way that he's feeling that's not with someone who's, in the game, as it were. Yeah.
And he wants to, for the first time ever, I guess, want to be called Dennis, as you mentioned, and kind of go back to who he once was and try and, as he says, he's never had a chance to exercise his conscience within prison. Like, he now kind of feels regretful over the things he's done, but he's never had the opportunity to change what he does. And he's constantly aware of his wrongdoings, but feels powerless to stop them with the lifestyle within which he's trapped. So he is really looking for something different, something where he can make a difference and actually start, redeeming himself. He seems, really dedicated towards the Deacon's chats now, and he's clearly reached a lot more of a bottom than he did last time.
Right, that's about it. That's about all I have for the little Cutty bit.
Yeah, sure. Okay, so we've got one more fairly little bit with the Stanfield crew. So, Marlo, Chris and Snoop check in with Jamal, a young dealer. Marlo is put in charge of watching his pigeon coops. Marlo tells Chris they are going to step back and wholesale their package to other dealers and let Avon take their corners. Marlo hopes to bide his time and have Snoop catch Avon unawares. So,
right.
This is the first we see of Marlo's pigeon coop.
Oh yeah, that's right. It's used in quite a few scenes, isn't it? These Marlo moments with him with his pigeons. We see that he has, for quite a violent man, he has a strangely sort of calming hobby.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it's certainly weird.
Reminded me a little bit of bit in season 2 when Ziggy goes to get the duck. There's another sort of not the same birds, but another place where people are going to with large amounts of birds in cages.
Yeah, definitely. And Ziggy liked the duck because he empathised with it being trapped. The wings were clipped, etc. And I don't know if that's the same sort of symbolisms going on here, but it certainly feels like it would be consistent with Marlo's character to enjoy imprisoning these pigeons that would ordinarily be free. But it's certainly cool to see him up on the rooftops here. This is kind of his HQ almost.
And he's talking a little bit more about how, as we've established, he's taking people off the corners, concentrating on his wholesaling. And then he's just going to wait. He knows what Avon is going to do. He's smart enough to know what his move is likely to be. And then he's going to use that as an advantage to start hitting back again, just in a different way.
Yeah. Yep. So it's the first time Marlo, well, the only time I think Marlo ever stops violence or holds violence back, at least. I'd totally forgotten that this was kind of one of his game plans here. And it's good to see that he now has a real advisors bench with Chris and Snoop playing their roles that they've come to play in season 4 and 5, finally. And they're very keen for Marlo to get back on the street. And whilst not necessarily to start dealing again, they want to keep wholesaling. They do want to put a hurting on the Barksdale to make sure that they're not begin to get perceived as weak.
Yeah, they're playing the rep game slightly differently, a bit more tactfully. They still care very much about their reputation, and there's a real rule of fear going on with Marlo. But they're smart enough to know when to pull back and when it's right to give your opponent a chance to get comfortable and then try and deliver a slightly more decisive blow.
Yeah, definitely. So it reminded me a little bit of the way Stringer advised Avon about perceived weakness with Omar in season 1. Although, as you mentioned, it was kind of motivated a little bit differently. And it's less about personal kind of rep and more about just being clever with the business and making sure that Avon doesn't get overconfident. And putting a hurting on them, yeah. So it's good to see. So should we quickly move on to the final bit of Stanfield where they actually put the hurting on Marlo?
Yep.
Okay, so Slim Charles assigns Poot to one of Marlo's corners with some muscle for protection. Poot is worried about retaliation from Marlo. Later, Stanfield soldier Snoop kills one of the soldiers in a drive-by from a motorbike, and Poot narrowly escapes being shot.
So yeah, I'll little smattering of violence for the episode, and like you say, it is Marlo just almost like keeping things ticking over. That's like his equivalent of that is just go and attack one corner, just make it quite clear that we're still around. Talks about we got a slightly say more involved. It's not that much more involved, but slightly more involved appearance from Snoop, and talked about it being her turn. And we don't quite see that same level of accuracy that they talk about later on. She's just kind of like fires quite wildly in a sort of sweeping pattern. You'd think they would have been sitting ducks the way she stopped right in front of them like that. But Poot goes down, but is smart enough to know to stay down and pretend to be, to fade in death.
Yeah.
In order to stay that way.
Yeah, definitely. And it gave the audience a nice little moment of tension when we wondered, first time round, I certainly wondered whether that blood belonged to Poot as well.
The way it kind of zooms in on his face, it almost has that. It seems like exactly what the show would do if the character were dead.
Yeah.
To kind of show his face in that way, and the way he's sort of lying on the pavement surrounded. It's a very particular shot, but it then has him open his eyes, and it's a nice little, nice mini twist.
Yeah, yeah. And I guess that big spray of fire speaks to their idea to suppress them rather than necessarily cause some real damage. They just want to make it clear that they haven't left the street yet, and they will be back.
That's true, yeah, that's a good point. So, yeah, it's less about specific targeting and more like keeping their heads down.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's nice. That's good.
Definitely. As we do know, Snoop does have the skills. She doesn't subscribe to the West Coast notion of drive-bys. They aim and hit people. So that'll come later on. But yeah, it's good to see. And Snoop feeling again like she hasn't quite been established who she is yet. I think this is the only time we really see her wearing outwardly sort of girly clothing. on the motorbike here. And it's the first, I think...
It doesn't seem like something she would ever wear based on what we know about the rest of the character from the show. It seems like it's a bit too obviously like the female one, you know. It's
exactly, yeah.
Kind of unnecessary little prop, really.
Yeah. So it's we know how macho masculine Snoop is as a character, and she does talk about bitches and stuff like that on occasion. So she's very much one of the boys, I guess, and that's one time I guess they haven't quite refined her yet as an early character. So yeah, it's good to see, and good to see again Poot getting his own corner. It really feels like, as I mentioned before, people on the Barksdale side of things are really climbing the ladders slowly.
Yeah.
Poot really feels like he's got his moment here to run his own operation.
He doesn't seem too happy about it.
No, he does seem very worried. Ex-Stanfield territory. So I can understand why he's very concerned, and for good reasons, as we see like 10 seconds later. So
it's that old thing, you know, about being careful what you wish for.
Yeah.
He may have wanted that kind of position of responsibility, but at the time that it's come now, it's a slightly undesirable position to be in.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. And I don't know if they mean anything, because the conversation before they die is Poot's muscle man wanting some Newports, and Poot's like, "Oh, I forgot to buy them. I'll go grab them once I've drunk this drink," and then they both get shot. So I don't know if he died while Poot owed him something, but I mean that's really digging deep. But I don't know if they wanted to explain something there. I mean, Cole checked out with McNulty owing him a clearance, so.
What about people passing away whilst they owe someone something?
Yeah, basically. Very, very minor packet of Newports, but nonetheless, they're owed.
Yeah, I think something we should keep an eye out for.
Okay.
So is that about it for the Stanfields?
Yeah, we're just moving on to our final section of the major case unit. Little word of warning, there are 7 sections in the major case unit. It really is the bread and butter of the episode.
The big finish.
Yeah. So firstly, we see Lieutenant Daniels reporting that Stringer Bell and Marlo Stanfield are the unit's new targets. He tells them that their work on Kintel Williamson is being put on hold. Sidner and Prez are dismayed that their efforts today are going to be wasted. Sidner vows that one day he'll work for a real department. Daniels calls McNulty into his office. On his way, McNulty asks Prez to look into the woman that he slept with, Terry D'Agostino, pretending that it may be a part of the case. Daniels accurately suspects McNulty of his involvement in their changing targets via Major Colvin even. McNulty admits his insubordination, unapologetically. McNulty defends his decision, saying that it had to be done and he would have gone to the devil himself to get the unit's focus on Stringer Bell renewed. Daniels tells McNulty to find a new home as he is out of the unit once Stringer is arrested.
So a bit of frustration to begin with for Sidner and Prez, who, after we've seen all that they've done to try and make a bit more of a interesting case with Kintel Williamson, it's all fallen down again.
Yeah.
So, and we see from Sidner, he talks about working for a real police department. That's a line that comes up in various permutations. I know McNulty says it at one point about, I wonder what it's like to work in a real police department.
Yep, and I believe Gus Haynes says it.
Gus,
yeah.
I wonder what it feels like to work at a real newspaper.
Yeah, definitely. So the idea.
But then again, is that just a kind of it is just an idealistic, this notion of the real police department?
Yeah.
In reality, there is nothing that quite gets much more realer than what they're in now.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. So it's like thinking that a real establishment institution would never have to deal with financial problems or financial conflicts. It would always be run efficiently, and it's just, as you mentioned, it's just kind of this never attainable idea. So,
yeah, it's sort of a nice introduction of a sort of general, I suppose, existential problem that all people face, in the sense that what we have right now is not real, and that one day we will have something that is real and it will fulfill us completely. And as Freeman says later on, a life is something that happens with these moments that never, whilst you're waiting for these moments that never come.
Yeah,
it's kind of a reinforcement of that idea that reality is what you have now. It's going on right now. There is no kind of real police department that you can end up in. You have to deal with what you have right now.
That's very true, yeah.
So it's a kind of common thing that's used in a couple of places throughout the show just to reinforce a sort of more general existential idea, I suppose.
That's it, yeah. A great link, definitely. Very good. I guess as we see on that note, the collateral damage that McNulty causes again. Kima certainly struggles to stomach the pain of her co-workers, having planted the idea particularly of going around the bosses here. But McNulty doesn't seem too concerned. He knows that they're going back onto the right target as far as he's concerned. So, but I was surprised by how taken Sidner and Prez had been to the Kintel case. Like they'd really, really dedicated themselves to it and really feel cut up by the sudden change of target.
Based on what we know about them, they're nothing if not professionals.
Yeah,
they seem very committed to their work.
Definitely, yeah.
Both of them have given major sacrifices in terms of time and effort. Sidner's put himself in harm's way a few times, being the sort of undercover, and obviously done plenty of man hours. And Prez, to some extent, I think is just enjoying his chance to get to geek out on a few things. He certainly seems very, very excited by the speed dial, as we see later on.
Yeah, it's true, yeah. But, despite his pain right now, McNulty's very happy to rub salt in the wound by exploiting Prez's skills with the paper trail to track Terry. It's nonetheless hard to say how it fits with the case. Don't think he's fooling anyone there, not even Prez, but Prez is more than happy to go and have a look for him. So I don't really know how he would have explained that one, really, like a white Washington politician being involved in the case.
Yeah.
No subtlety there, I guess. But
he's just a mate.
Yeah.
Just a mate of one of the suspects.
Or a leap of foresight as he sees she's one of the financiers of the drug operation.
Yeah, going for some major corruption thing.
Yeah. But so I guess this then leads to McNulty's shameless chat with Daniels, where he proudly claims that Stringer was the target then. He's still the target now. There's no explanation from him that he's made the right decision beyond that, or why he would justify that decision. It's just this personal thing that he won't let go. It's very strange, really.
Well, it's this general trend with McNulty's behaviour is when he's on and up. He feels very cocksure, he's very confident in himself. He's more than happy to say it straight up to Daniels, like he would have done absolutely anything to make it about Stringer Bell, because then it would make it about McNulty. Yeah. And then when McNulty's on a down and is feeling very sorry for himself, he wouldn't do that. He'd just be very kind of like self-deprecating and talking about how terrible things are and whatnot. He would have been in a very different state, but because he's obviously feeling good about himself, he just goes into it with the eye to unashamedly piss off Daniels. And the end result is that Daniels tells him that he's going to have to find somewhere else to go once they deal with Stringer, because it seems like he's just reached the end of his tether with him, and you can kind of see why.
Yeah. And McNulty really is, there's one thing to proudly proclaim that you went behind the boss's back, but also to really rub the salt in the wound and be quite patronising, you're better than most, boss. There's just no remorse shown here whatsoever. And, Daniels really quite satisfyingly fires him here. And annoyingly enough, it might not be a good move, because we all know that McNulty is probably the most capable of being the good detective in that unit, even more so than Freeman in many ways, particularly as like a physical investigative policeman. So, it's certainly good on a moral standpoint to get rid of McNulty, but I don't know if they'll regret it down the line.
Sometimes you've got to face that struggle up against a particular person who is extraordinarily frustrating, but also just has these moments of brilliance that you can't help but be sort of impressed and allow their past transgressions to fall away.
Yeah.
And McNulty is definitely someone like that.
Yep, definitely. Once McNulty is... once he proves capable of working with, rather than against the unit, he is, the ultimate one to have with you. But can you really forgive him? Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so our next section.
Yeah, I mean, I was just going to say that having said that,
Yeah, sure.
the problems that he gets himself into later on, it doesn't end up ending particularly well for him, so it's not like he gets out of it scot-free. So like you say, with a character, with someone like that, it's quite unsustainable.
Yeah.
But we'll see more of that as the show goes along. So yeah, move us on to the next bit, if you will.
Yeah, so Freeman and Prez analyse the phone that Bubbles procured for the unit. Prez states that the information is difficult to interpret without knowing more about Marlo's organisation. Freeman comments that a phone from the Barksdale organisation would allow them to map out the organisation with everything that they already know, but it would be difficult to get a wiretap up with the phones being disposed of so quickly. The operation is temporary in nature. Okay, so I guess this is a fairly short conversation really, but it just kind of nails home the idea of the evolution, almost the natural selection of the street, and the burner culture, and breaking down the call networks from Finnish burners. It's all historical, it's tricky, and you get the sense that they will eventually find the solution, but it's just a case of catch up. Sometimes it's the criminals catching up, sometimes it's the cops, and in this case it's the cops.
Yeah, that's true. It's these changing technologies. We've talked about it before, how the means of communication on the street develops as the show goes along, and it gets gradually more sophisticated. In reality, what it's demonstrating is a very condensed form of what really happened, because all the pager stuff was going on in the, like, wasn't it in like the 80s or 90s or whatever?
Yeah, it feels like there's it feels
tied to reality. It doesn't feel
Definitely.
sort of totally out of touch.
I guess it feels like there's 10
that's what
years
it's showing.
between. There's kind of a decade between each season in terms of technology. I feel like there's kind of pages in the 80s, and then season 2 is very much just it's just phone calls, isn't it? Really, in the 90s, and then in the 2000s, you have these kind of mobile phones that you can kind of top up with pay as you go. So I feel like that's kind of a nice little progression they have there. But yeah, sorry. Please continue there.
Yeah, I was just going to say they're just like you say, they're just catching up. They're trying to understand this web of phones, and eventually they'll get there, and then the then the drug crews have to catch up again, and they develop into something new. And what we end up with in season 5 is Marlo getting caught on taking pictures and sending them to people on his phone. It's sort of this new. You're going from pages to picture messages.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. Actually,
we show that they actually like confiscate all these quite fancy phones. So there's a little bit of an emphasis on how it has changed, and they're basically just discussing how they're dealing with that evolution, as you called it, in this scene. That's pretty much it, really. It's a chance for Prez and Freeman to geek out a bit on the tech.
Yeah, as we'll see later once they do catch up. But for now, the next section, McNulty, Sidner and Greggs restart their surveillance work. They begin with Bodie and wait for him to dump a phone. Greggs remembers him, but McNulty doesn't. McNulty convinces them to drink with him, saying that he knows an easier way to find a phone. They narrowly miss seeing Avon meet with Bodie. And it's cool how Greggs remembers Bodie, but McNulty doesn't. Greggs has always been the one who's been slightly more dedicated to the idea of following the streets. I think it's more naturally what she's been involved with as a police in the narcotics unit, constantly having to shadow drug dealers and take part in hand-to-hands, that sort of thing. And also, I think the one time McNulty met Bodie so far is right at the start of the show, when he was known to him as Mr. Shit. He refused to give his name down in the low-rises. So
oh yeah, that's right.
It makes sense that McNulty wouldn't quite make the connection there. Particularly seeing him now as such a more important
you,
part
me,
of
and your friend Mr. Shit here.
That's it, yeah. He's gone a long way since then, old Bodie.
And Greggs, having worked with Bubbles quite a lot, she gets a lot more of that information from him and tends to understand who the characters are a little bit more.
Yeah.
So she's a bit more tapped into that, I guess.
Yeah.
I'm wondering why. And this is a very minor thing, but I'm wondering why Sidner and Greggs, when McNulty says that he knows another way to get a phone, they don't ask him what it is. They're just like, oh, okay, leave with him. Like, so it felt a bit weird that they were just convinced by that and then left, and no more was really said about it.
Yeah,
it seemed a bit uncharacteristic of them.
I had that down as well. It is an oddly strange scene. tonally, there's something a bit wrong with it.
It's just that McNulty's like, I know another way, and suddenly he has this position of authority, and they completely accept it, and not like, yeah, what is it? Like,
Yeah.
especially given this notion that McNulty is very unpredictable, you never quite know what he's going to try and do next. You think they'd be a bit more concerned and question that more immediately.
Yeah, it's weird. It kind of comes across half as a eureka moment and half as a I'm really bored, can I just go and drink now, please, sort of thing. Like, it just says, oh, I'm buying, come to the bar, please, we'll do it tomorrow, sort of thing.
Yeah, his focus is just on, like, let's go and drink.
Yeah. So it is odd, and I mean, the idea he has is a good one, but it just doesn't make sense that he wouldn't reveal it now. Like, it's just, particularly as you say, more importantly, why did Sidner and Kima seem so at peace with not knowing what this great eureka moment is?
And of course, their haste to go and get drunk means that they narrowly miss seeing Avon.
Yeah, that's true.
So there's a bit of an impact there. Would have been interesting to see their reactions then, but we have to save that until the end.
That's true. I don't know if they'd have been more frustrated or less than they were by finding out on the computer. But yeah.
They certainly would have got more drunk, I would have thought.
Yeah, that's true.
And speaking of being drunk, Greg ends up coming home drunk to Cheryl. Are we going to have that bit now, or are we...
Yes, that's the next stage. So
Okay.
You put the words into my mouth. Greggs comes home drunk, and Cheryl tries to discuss what has happened to their relationship. Greggs tells her that she went along with Cheryl's desire for a child because she didn't want to disappoint her. Cheryl tells her she couldn't be more disappointed and asks Greggs to leave. Prez sets up the board for the Barksdale and Stanford investigation. So far he has pictures of Stringer, Bodie and Marlo, among others. McNulty, Greggs and Sidner arrive and begin to implement their plan to get a new cell phone. Greggs asks Caroline if she can stay at hers.
So yeah, a little bit of a domestic here with Cheryl and Kima, and we see these rifts that have been opened up over time. It really comes to a boiling point here. Cheryl has clearly had enough. Greg's kind of laissez-faire attitude to the whole thing has not only pissed off Cheryl, but it's really kind of... It's had a lot more of an impact on that because it's demonstrated, as far as Cheryl is concerned, a lack of interest in their relationship in general. As far as she's concerned, having this child is like a key part of their relationship, and Greg's is not really having any show in it whatsoever. So this is a bit of a final straw for them. The fact that she's drunk as well, and she's just like being quite flippant, just further reinforces the fact that she doesn't seem interested, and so she ends up having to stay with Caroline, who fortunately seems to have some kind of spare room or whatever.
Yeah.
So that's sorted out nice and quickly for Greg's. There isn't really much emphasis placed on her suddenly being out of a place to stay. She's able to keep going with the detail and maintain that plot going on there without putting her in too much disarray.
Yeah, I mean, it is certainly a very sad scene, and a real gradual kind of downgrade from what we saw in the first season when they were a very happily together couple, and it's it's that final conversation of their relationship here, a very finalized scene. This is the end for them here, really. And Kima almost goes as far to blame the baby on their relationship, but Cheryl manages to stop her just in time. And Kima then has to opt for the explanation of, I didn't want to disappoint you, which clearly just shows she hadn't really thought through the future of their relationship, really. As
displays a lack of trust as well.
Yeah.
When you say that, I didn't want to do it, but I also didn't want you to be disappointed, that's something that, generally speaking, in a healthy relationship, you would vocalize, and you would make a point of discussion in order to, keep it transparent. But instead, she's just bottled it up, and as a result, it's come to a head here.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely.
There wasn't, Greg's even says that there wasn't really much of a discussion. They didn't really discuss it at all. It just kind of happened, and she went along with it, and she didn't protest, and it's put them where they are now.
Yep, definitely. So it's all come to a head, and I guess there was some sort of naive thought that Kima would be happy for Cheryl to go ahead and have the baby, and Kima would do her detective thing, and Cheryl would do her child rearing thing. And I guess what she didn't realise is that it would sap all of Cheryl's time and energy, and then of course layering that on top of the fact that Cheryl's not happy with Kima having gone back on her promise to stay in the office. That's of course mounting up on all the troubles they're having at the moment. It's just finally paying off all that's gone wrong so far for them. And they're now going to start going their separate ways as far as the story goes. And the story does continue to follow both of them. And Cheryl, it won't be long before she finds another girlfriend, a lawyer girlfriend, I believe. And eventually Kim will start seeing Elijah in the later seasons as well, who's the son.
Yeah, that's true. And then with the little bit we had after that, we had Prez getting into his setting up of the board. We see a lot of very deliberate straight lines and markings, and he clearly enjoys, again, we're seeing how much he enjoys getting into the details of the presentation and is geeking out, and what really sets him up for season 4 to be such a good teacher, really.
Yeah, definitely. Absolutely, yeah. He seems to very awkwardly explain about the speed dial feature, or doesn't really explain it at all. It's just kind of...
he basically just says really excitedly that there's a speed dial, and no one else either seems to know or care what that is.
It's just that the show has a thing about Presbelusi's obsession with dial pads. He seems to play with them for hours a day. Like he found that code by playing with a dial pad and seeing all the different combinations of letters and numbers and patterns and the rest of it. And clearly he's done it here again, and somehow found some sort of speed dial thing, and that's really helped them to create a network. And they're now starting to be able to keep up with things as they switch phones, because they've got the network that they can then apply to another set of phones, which is kind of cool. We are jumping ahead a little bit here, actually, that there is a section for this on its own, but that they do feed into each other quite nicely. And it's nice to see here Prez give McNulty the information on Terry, just as Kima is asking Caroline about having a place to stay. It's kind of one relationship ends and another begins. So, yeah, it's quite cool to see.
Yeah, nice.
Right, let's move on to the next one. So this is a fairly lengthy one, and it's where the MCU, the Western District, and the Barksdale organisation all link up in one scene. So Bodhi and Puddin have moved into Marlo's new abandoned territory. Shamrock phones to recommend that they move trade into Amsterdam with so many police officers watching the corners. Bodhi loads his crew into an SUV to relocate. McNulty and Greggs follow them, stopping them on their way, and protest that they are immune to police searches because they are headed to Amsterdam. McNulty swaps out Bodhi's phone for a similar model. The drug dealers become increasingly agitated as they perceive the unit's action as a breach of Colvin's promise. McNulty calls for backup, and Hurt, Carver, Colicchio and Truck respond. McNulty asks Carver what Amsterdam is, having heard Bodhi mention it several times. Greggs also starts to question Carver, and he is forced to tell them about Colvin's initiative. Colvin arrives and explains his plan to the unit and asks them to keep it quiet. He pleads with McNulty to keep it from the bosses, and McNulty is impressed with Colvin's attitude. They return to the detail office and give the phone to Freeman and Prez.
Yeah, it's we end up with Colvin essentially repeating McNulty's mantra of "fuck the bosses."
And it's not until he says that you sense that McNulty's fully on board with it. It's like that display of attitude is what does it for me. You, sir, are a good friend of mine, sort of thing. So there's this smile that they sort of share over it, certainly.
We start off by seeing the fact that Avon has got people to move on to these abandoned corners, but some of them end up taking it pointlessly anyway because they end up going to Amsterdam as part of Stringer's move to test the waters there, see if it's legitimate.
And Colvin's doing a good job of incentivising it by really bashing those corners near to the Amsterdam. Yeah. And, you know, that they're being forced off, so it's good to see.
And you really do sense the injustice that they must feel in a strange sort of way, getting stopped with all of these drugs, but at the same time, how strange it must be for them to have to kind of give back this big package, something that they've been institutionalized to believe is they should clamp down on and seize on any, even the smallest opportunity, and now they have to give this massive package back to them, essentially, and let them go on their way because they have this immunity. It's obviously difficult to explain to them, and it shows as well, as we mentioned earlier on, near the start of our analysis, how word doesn't seem to have travelled all that much about Amsterdam. It certainly doesn't seem to have travelled much in the police anyway, which is unusual. You really would think that it would have been passed on to them somehow, but if they're so wrapped up in their detail, then maybe they've just not had the interactions that would leak that information to them.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, in some ways it does seem silly that no one's caught wind of it once it's reached this magnitude. And particularly as I believe we only get to see one of the three free zones, the Vincent Street one they call it, because I believe that the map that they show, there are 2 other free zones across the Western, and I think they're the 2 locations that Colvin sniffed out with Mello on the 2nd episode. We just don't ever get to see them, but we have to assume that they're of a similar sort of nature. Perhaps this is the most popular one. But that's a big bunch of the Western that's really hidden from the rest of the city, and no one knows about it, including the most tooled up and most keyed up department in the police, the MCU. So yeah, it's good to see what happens when they come and interact when the Amsterdam is being caught wind by other people, and there's this conflict that's a little bit similar to when Colvin was talking to the old lady. You've got a program for moving me, but not for moving them. It's a similar sort of predicament. I'm going to have to let these guys off because I've told them something else before. And again, a really easy moment to sympathise with Colvin for that reason. So,
and conflict within an organisation or an institution that's supposed to be on the same side, and they don't even, left hand doesn't seem to know what the right is doing. We see a similar thing in the politics with Carcetti and Royce, I suppose. They're supposed to be part of the same administration. Supposed to be sort of in for the city, their allegiances to the city, but because of these clashes and miscommunications, misunderstandings, or intentional miscommunications, then it's kind of creating this conflict within an institution that's supposed to be based around what may be perceived as supposed to be being around a single vision or a single purpose, or certainly with the same allegiances.
Yeah, definitely.
And this is obviously confusing the hell out of the people on the ground, because all of a sudden they've got to go and do the exact opposite of what they've been taught to do after all these years. Letting people go off scot-free.
Yeah, certainly. And Kima and Sidna certainly have a hard time stomaching it. Legalising drugs with much chastisement, they say. McNulty certainly seems a bit more convinced, but really wants to have a chat first. And as we mentioned before, it's when Colvin kind of goes for the fuck the bosses line that McNulty really gets on the same wavelength. And unlike the others, McNulty really he has respect for the long-term genius of it from a policing point of view, but is also smart enough to say that there's nothing sustainable here. The bosses won't ever allow this or promote it, so once it stops, it goes back to normal. And it's nice to see that McNulty's the one there having that kind of philosophical conversation about it, really.
And they're also, willfully or otherwise, turning a bit of a blind eye to all of the horrors of the situation in Amsterdam that we've seen earlier on in the episode with Bubbles. Yeah,
I mean, they haven't seen it in the flesh, but they are, by extension, turning their blind eye on all that crime going down, absolutely, yeah.
Any other bits here? I think that's about it, really is.
There was a strange framing for that conversation with Colvin and McNulty. It was like really kind of close up, wasn't it? And just sort of angled up high.
Pressed up against them with the sun beaming down behind them.
Yeah.
Maybe as if it's their day in the sun.
Yeah, kind of a grand day out. And it's nice to see 3 of the institutions kind of crossing paths here.
Yeah.
Otherwise staying very separate. Okay, right, let's move on to the next section. So we have 2 left, and then we're done. So, firstly, Prez reports the information he found on Terry D'Agostino to McNulty. McNulty uses the number Prez obtained and cons his way into finding out her whereabouts. He travels to the fundraiser she's attending that evening. He is uncomfortable with the crowd and makes to leave, but she notices him and arranges to meet him in her hotel room after the event.
Yeah, that's a kind of pretty simple bit of McNulty getting into this event that, again, he seems very out of his depth in. We've seen quite a few scenes where he goes to various places, but it seems like anywhere that isn't directly involved on the job, he's just playing a bit of a part in order to be there. Anything that's not him being a detective just feels a bit out of place for him.
Yeah.
So it definitely seems not uncharacteristic when he arrives there and pretty much suddenly wants to leave again. There's a nice little line there where he talks to the waiter or bartender or whatever, and he asks for Jameson.
It's Protestant whiskey.
Yeah.
No,
Bushmills, is it that he offers instead?
I think Bushmills is the only one they have, and
yeah, and he's like, that's Protestant.
That's it. Yeah, clearly out of his depth here. It's Washington. They do things a bit differently, and there's a very notable kind of unease to McNulty as he wanders around in his slightly scruffy suit amongst all the bigwigs.
But he's, he does kind of get what he wants. I mean, he's hoping to be spied by Terry, and that's what happens.
Yep. And
then he ends up getting another chance to spend the night with her. Yeah.
And he wants to be spied, looking like he's doing something. At least doesn't want to, he does quite well that. He's clearly walking towards someone at the time, which is nice. And she's, I think, a lot keener than he imagined seeing her. She's clearly ready to break off some important conversation to go and tempt him over for the evening, which he's very excited about. And his beaming face once she gives him the good news is it's like really, really happy with himself.
It's a really very, very satisfied face.
It's so pleased with himself. He just can't contain it. He's just sort of dancing out of the event. So
it's proper Cheshire cat grin. Like.
Yeah.
Slightly, almost a little bit sinister.
Yeah. So yeah. Not to take away from Terry's happiness, I'm sure she's happy as well. It was clearly a very fun night last time. And he's just got to wait 2 hours now, and then it can happen again.
Yeah, he's willing to wait, clearly.
Yeah. And no shame the next day either. He just kind of strolls in so proudly, having not showered and woke up in the wrong town.
Yeah.
That's who I am. I'm McNulty. Read it and weep.
Yeah.
So,
but like I say, especially when he's on and up like this, he's just totally not ashamed at all.
Yeah. So speaking of which, let's move on to that. So McNulty is late into the unit office and finds Pullman and Daniels receiving a briefing on Freeman and Prez's analysis of the burners. They have identified a communication network with 15 distinct phone users by analysing the call pattern. None of the phones identified list any user information because of the tariff and company used. They have identified a coordinator at the top of the pyramid. They have found that the phones are pre-programmed with the numbers before going into use. Freeman asks Greggs to have the Western DEU squad collect phones for them.
So a bit of a roundup section here on the progress that they've made with the phones and how they've figured out some kind of like pyramid or web or nexus or whatever you want to call it for the how the communications works. Yeah,
definitely. And this is the bit where I mentioned Prez gets a little obsessed with the dialing pads and
it has a speed dial. There's just no response. Absolutely dead in the room.
Fantastic.
It's really awkward, isn't it? It's a genuinely very awkward silence. It's one of the very few moments in TV where it creates an awkward silence and the characters almost don't need to emphasise the fact that it's awkward. It doesn't need to zoom in on anyone's face or show this like typical reality TV over-edited sort of reaction faces. Look how awkward it is. It literally just stays where it is and people just don't react. It's a genuinely like very really awkward scene.
Well, there's a few reasons that add to the awkwardness. Like Freeman, announces him. It's almost like a drum roll for his announcement of the speed dial. and then Prez dances. He just sort of dances his way through the sentence. He sort of starts bowing, and so it's just this really weird movement. And just
it's brilliant. It's absolutely spot on.
It's fantastic. Prez moment definitely trumps his moment where he's asked if he grabbed any arse by Kima. Which is again pretty awkward, but on the other side of the tracks.
That's all in the face. That one's all in the face. It's the expression is perfect. I love Prez.
So he seems to find these technically in-depth things involving dial pads very entertaining in a way that the department can't quite get on the same level with.
Hey, if you're going to end up teaching maths, you have to be a very particular type of person.
Yeah, definitely. So it's good that they've got him in there. He's a great character, and I do feel bad because I know that in a couple episodes' time something very bad is coming for Prez, when he will go out and for a Chinese takeaway and have a bit more eventful of a time than he imagined.
Yes.
But at the moment, things are looking good for him, and he's very happy in his position. Despite seeming insurmountable just a few episodes ago at least, we're very quickly getting to a place where they're discovering how to continually monitor the same people as they go from burner to burner. So this is once they establish a pattern, they can then try and match the pattern to other sets of phones, and the evolution is just as strong on both sides now. They're catching up.
Yeah, it's interesting how for a show that displays so many things as being sort of cyclic and bleak and being trapped in particular ways, it also shows that no matter how impossible something might seem initially, sort of putting that work into it and putting that dedication into it does have results. It's one of the. It's nice to have these kind of positive aspects to the work that they're doing, especially after we've shown at the beginning of the episode how frustrated in this situation anyway Prez was about having all of his earlier work pushed aside, but now he's getting involved with this new one, so it doesn't seem so bad all of a sudden.
Yep. Yeah, definitely. And this is also one of the only times where they're not up against the bureaucracy. It really, I think the phone companies for the burners can be traced without subscriber information. It's just kind of available if you plug the phone in, which is nice. They don't have to go through some big red tape barrier to get anywhere, which is a nice moment for them. And I think this is a scene where where Freeman's sat on the computer at the table and Kima's sat down next to him, Prez is on the left, and all the big MCU players are there. This is a scene that's used in a lot of promotional material, actually. I caught it. I think you can see it on all sorts of materials advertising the show. Just the crew kind of working. So it's a really nice scene that sort of sums them up well.
Right, so what's left?
So we have one little section left, the closing scene, the bookend. So Greggs and McNulty meet with Herc and Carver and recruit them into phone collecting. Herc tells them that he saw Avon driving around. McNulty and Greggs both refuse to believe Herc's claim. On returning to the office, they check Avon's status on the computer and are outraged when they find he's been paroled.
There's a nice shot as they meet with Herc and Carver, and there's a nice shot of Herc in the wing mirror to show that other side of the conversation without having to keep doing shot, reverse shot. Nice way to keep the frame steady and have someone in a mirror or something like that in order to keep them on screen. It's sort of a technique that I think has been used a few times before. It reminds me of when we see Beady driving away in Season 2 and there's Frank in the wing mirror there.
Yeah.
Another very kind of... That one's slightly more pointed emotionally, but yeah, it's just a nice little technique to keep people on screen without having to sort of cut between them.
Yeah, definitely. It's a really nice technique, and the show used it last episode, I think, with Stringer and Bodie in the car. It's, as you say, a really nice way to kind of keep things moving without having to cut between people. I think it was used again when Cutty was at the traffic lights on the landscaping job. We see kind of
That's true, yeah.
the landscaping guy make a judgment through the wing mirror as he sees Cutty kind of weigh up the criminal life versus the landscaping life. But yeah, that's very nice, and we see, as we mentioned,
quite an unusual end to the episode, in fact.
Yeah, very abrupt.
Another little bit of a slight stylistic bit like we had before in the night scene with Amsterdam, where there's all these bits where it's quite disorienting and a bit of slow motion being used. We have a very kinetic end to the episode, in a way that we have something being sort of thrown at the camera and then that blocking the frame, as it were, and cutting to black. So
yeah,
a very vigorous ending, and really heightening the frustration that we feel with the people in the detail and people with the major case unit as they find out that all of this work that they did on this one man has led to him being paroled after, a really short space of time.
Yeah, definitely. And it's cool, yeah, because as we see that the blackness of the credits is the blackness of the shadow of that filing cabinet that Kima throws, which is very nice. It's just kind of a direct transition, as you say. And yeah, just very frustrating. For Herc, it's a passing comment. For the MCU, it's a complete game changer, and it's quite tense seeing them go up to the computer and us knowing the inevitable, them not quite in the know yet, still catching up, and real frustration as they see that pretty much all of season 1 just got undone. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, they were talking before about it being a shame that they've had to ditch all of their information on... Well, not ditch, but sort of put to one side the information that they have on Kintel Williamson, and that's a minor inconvenience compared to this.
Yep. Yeah, definitely. So, it's not good. The one thing that they do at the end here, though, is they intersperse the discovery of Avon's release with the falsified media hoo-ha over Dozeman's gun, which is right at the end of the episode as well. With the help of the citizens of Baltimore, we have retrieved this gun. So again, it's making another pretty strong point. And this is also intercut with Carcetti filing up his document as well. So it's
he's writing his letter to Royce.
That's right. Yeah. So it's a three-way finish, and clearly they're trying to make a point here. And another pretty strong point about these police priorities. The gun is what they're focused on, but really Avon's out on the street and no one batted an eyelid. So no wonder Kima just chucks that filing cabinet straight at the camera.
Yeah, they've saved the street from this murderous gun.
Yeah. Just absolutely ridiculous. So with that, we reach the end.
Yeah, that's it, isn't it? That's the whole episode.
Yeah, unless you got anything else to add that I might have missed, I don't think so. I've missed anything.
I just wanted to talk a little bit more generally about the episode in a whole, in that it seems to be, there seems to be a lot of us seeing the effects, so the follow-on effects on institutions. So we've seen a lot of things being put in place, and now we're seeing the impact that it's having. I suppose one is what's going on with Amsterdam and the impact that that's having with the stats coming back, and we're seeing the change that it's having and how Colvin decides to act upon that. We see how Avon returning to the fold. We see how the change that that's now having, especially that now he's getting to push people back into corners. We see people being promoted into various situations within the Barksdale organisation, like you mentioned, and particularly with Shamrock, as he's been moved into this greater position and him now being in charge of the phones, we see that ends up being a bit of a problem as well, because once I've forgotten his name. Bernard.
Yeah.
Once Bernard starts buying these phones in bulk, and that ends up becoming the trend instead, it becomes easier for them to track where these disposable phones are being bought, and that in turn progresses the case for the major case unit. So it's kind of the impact that it's having on these institutions, and that seems to be a general idea going on with the episode.
Yeah, definitely. They're definitely reaping the rewards of everything they've put down so far. We're pretty deep into the series now, so it's about time, really. And really good to see that. Should we dive into our characters and other sections that we do at the end?
Yeah, let's take a look at our final sections.
Sure that's the one.
Breezy said that was the one. Who am I to say different?
Tell him I ain't gonna pay till he prove himself, though.
I told him that already. He said $1,500 for his troubles.
Damn.
Conscience do cost.
Yeah. For me this week, this was really the first week where literally no character stood out as more prominent than any others. I could barely pick a character.
It was a real ensemble piece this week, that's for sure. It was a lot of characters being used very carefully, and a lot of sort of cameos and not cameos, sorry, like introductions of characters, but almost feeling like they had little cameos because we know that they have greater importance later on. Yeah,
exactly. So it's so tricky. I mean, for that reason, I went for Bernard and Squeak really as perhaps the most memorable introduction here. And they've got quite a nice dynamic relationship set up from the go, and I thought it was pretty funny seeing the dynamics of their little road trip. A nice little mini story for the episode as well, and nice to see one of the more dull aspects of the Barksdale trade, and the show making it a lot more interesting than you might assume, as we see Squeak constantly nagging across the entire day as they work their way down I-95. So I thought that was quite cool to see those two. In terms of other strong characters that we're used to, I literally couldn't pick one out of the bag. They're all used very, very sparingly in this episode, as you mentioned.
I was going to. I mean, I agree. It's very difficult to pick them out. I think that you're right about the Bernard and Squeak sequences being very memorable, just because they are a little bit different and showing something a bit more like, boots on the ground kind of work, really mundane stuff for the organisation, admin stuff that basically has to be done to protect them, but it's not really involved in any sort of decadence or violence or anything like that. But I was going to mention that I like Carver in this episode, and it's nice to see him taking the initiative in Amsterdam and trying to do right by the kids. Generally, Carver, although there have been moments where he's felt a bit conflicted, generally speaking, much of what we've seen so far from Carver has been based around his understandings of the Western District Way and banging heads and him following these procedures and doing people for loitering and all sort of stuff like that. And here, Carver is trying to make a difference. He's trying to follow Colvin's lead, take the initiative, introduce this kind of tax haven, try and protect the kids, trying to get on board with what's going on. So we're seeing a little bit more of how Carver is changing as a police officer and trying to deal with more than just tapping the stripes on his arm and dealing with seniority, but also the responsibility that comes with seniority. And it's nice to see him taking that with a firm grasp. So, yeah, Carver showing a little bit more in this episode as well.
Yeah, that's a good choice, actually. Definitely.
In terms of favourite scenes, I mentioned already that I did quite like the Amsterdam scene at night with Bubbles. Very disorienting, quite hellish and apocalyptic, as we've already said. Kind of covered that one quite a bit already. Did you have any other particular standout moments?
I put that scene at the top of mine as well, really. A little bit different. Quite a lengthy scene, really, that it conveyed a lot through visuals. And really nice of them to use Bubbles. Us seeing it through Bubbles' eyes was such a nice way to develop Bubs and make it a more emotive experience. As we know, Bubs really does have a heart, unlike a lot of the street. So it was nice the way that they used Bubbles there. And I quite like the pullover scene as well, where the MCU pulled over Bodhi to switch the phone over sneakily and then find out about Amsterdam inadvertently. So it was a nice interaction between the three institutions I mentioned already, and clever from a plot point of view as well, as it connects Barksdale starting to embrace Amsterdam, Colvin trying to effectively police Amsterdam, and the MCU trying to crack their burner assignment quite cleverly. They all move their plots on, and it feels quite convincing that all three of them would meet up by chance for these reasons. And just, again, seeing all these people interact after being separate for so long was just quite cool. So I'll put those two scenes down, really.
Yeah, nice. I think I would add to that the small bit with Cutty and the Deacon, just because it's an opportunity for Cutty to finally speak very candidly on how he feels and the frustration that he's been trapped into all these positions, watching himself do these things that he doesn't necessarily want to do. And the Deacon, who is not really sure how he can help, is in fact just helping by being there and listening to him. And I thought that was quite a touching scene, and really kind of feel how desperate Cutty must feel trying to find this direction in life. He's tried to focus it on this landscaping, and he's being told by the very people that he's working for, you don't want to be doing this.
Yeah.
So it's a difficult time for him. He must feel quite up in the air, and it's being portrayed nicely.
Definitely, yeah. Nice. Okay, so this episode was entitled Back Burner, or Back Burners, was it?
Back burners, plural.
Back burners, yeah. Okay, so what can we take from that?
Well, a back burner is, sort of metaphorically speaking, something that you put aside, something that's kind of not as important for the time being. So, I mean, there's obviously the word referencing to the burners being bought and getting this, getting all of these burners being collected that we see with Squeak and Bernard. I suppose Kintel Williamson is put on the back burner.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
I can't think of anything else.
Yeah,
That's about it, really.
I think quite a few of the characters kind of take up new things here, really, and do put other things behind them, and we see Cutty's doing it with criminality. Kima's doing it with her love life. Marlo is doing it with his corners, surprisingly, for this moment at least.
I suppose so, yeah, that's true.
The Western's doing it on drug arrests. So it's all going there, and as you mentioned, yeah, it's the focus on the word play with Burner. And I also thought it was interesting that we've already talked about kind of episodes that mirror across the seasons. There's episode 4 of seasons 1 and 2 are both cases, old cases and hard cases. Whereas with this one, I think season 2, episode 7 was called Backwash rather than Back Burners. But I don't know if there's any link up there. That was just something I was kind of trying to link between the seasons, if there was any kind of links to be made.
Yeah, Backwash in season 2, you're right, yeah.
It's the same episode in the season, so yeah, it's certainly a link at least.
I'd like to hope that maybe there's some kind of connection.
Yeah.
Although season 1, episode 7 is like one arrest, I believe it is.
Yeah. No, it doesn't quite work that way, does it? No.
You know, it's not creating much of a pattern.
No. All right, so that just leaves us with the epigraph. Conscience do cost Butchie.
That's right, yes. It's like very much speaks to Omar in the context of the scene. The fact that if he's going to be very, conscious of all these decisions that are going on and the guilt that he feels, that there is going to be a certain weight to that and he's going to have to deal with it. That's certainly the context of it in the scene. Do you think it has much of an impact? I think on the other characters, I would say that it certainly seems to apply to Colvin and Carver and the characters deep involved in Amsterdam. Like they're trying to use their conscience to apply this new system that can benefit the other corners and communities that can now be revitalized. But they also have to deal with the difficulties that brings in this very concentrated area. Carver's certainly trying to do right by the kids, and he ends up having to bear the brunt of a cost for that as well, and the fact that he tries to provide them with a basketball hoop and it gets destroyed straight away, or along with all the other difficulties that he's having to turn a blind eye to. Yeah,
very true. And I do like how Butchie puts it in the context of cost, because that is kind of what makes it really apply on a much wider basis. And obviously, as you mentioned, it applies to the psychological burden here most literally, but it's also an important part of the show in general. I think for me, it's people like Clay, Stringer, and Burrell that really stood out in terms of the cost. They're in positions where they need to put the consequences of the actions that they make behind them in order to go forward. So, Clay and Stringer particularly.
They seem to have little time for consequences.
No, it's all about the money for them, and I don't care who's giving it away, how I'm getting it comes towards me. And to do that, I have to take a certain step and disconnect myself from what's actually happening as a result of me hoovering up all this money. So it really rang through a lot with those characters for me. And of course, perhaps more topically, if with Burrell, if people took the time to care about Tosha's murder, it would get in the way of Dozeman's gun recovery. And in that sense, conscience again is costing in that situation. So we see it all over the wire, definitely.
I guess in contrast, we also have Herc, who has no real conscience on what happened with Avon. He doesn't, and as a result, he seems very unburdened by it.
Yeah, it's blissfully ignorant.
Well, we've pretty much come to the end of the episode, but you won't believe what's happened.
Oh no!
We have a live listeners' corner moment.
No.
From a long-time contributor, Damon, who's sent us an email. It came through about 20 minutes ago, but I've only just spotted it.
Oh, wow.
I haven't actually read it all the way through. I obviously haven't had a chance. So I'm just going to go through it here. Let's have a little look. So he says, do you guys have any take on why they made it seem like Poot had been killed for a couple of seconds after Snoop's motorcycle drive-by? I wonder if it was just a minor audience tease, but I wonder what your guys' take may be on it. When he's lying in the blood for a bit, it seems as if he's dead in the war, but then he gets up, realising that he hasn't been hit. Any point or subtext, do you think, or just a random audience tease? So we spoke a little bit about this at the beginning, didn't we?
Yeah.
The fact that it just seems to be a nice little moment where you get a bit of a twist. But I didn't read anything much more into it at the time.
Yeah, I mean, there's a mixture
Especially
of...
seeing as Poot does seem to get away with it, doesn't he? I mean, not just here, but he gets out of the game. He kind of ends up in some shoe shop, and he does seem to escape. So I guess there's that.
Yeah, it's the closest he comes to death, and then we do see that later on he actually fully escapes. Yeah, and yeah, I think as Damon says, but we have discussed it a little bit. It's a mixture of... I guess there is an element of them teasing the audience, particularly with the way that they dangle the camera over his seemingly dead head. But also just Poot just making the right move here. If these people want you dead, you at least play dead, and the show certainly showed him doing that for us. So I'm not sure if there's any subtext there. I can't really think of any particularly, but it certainly was an effectively conveyed scene and a good moment for Poot, and quite a scary moment for him.
Yeah, definitely. Damon goes on to talk a little bit more about some of the Wire cast that he met at, I think it must have been the after party that he went to, because obviously he was involved as an extra. Talks about meeting Trey Chaney, who's obviously Poot. He says that Fruit was the one most honoured to be asked to have a picture with, apparently.
Ah.
And Robert Chew, R.I.P., as Damon marks it, rightfully so. He said he seems the most put out, but I think it was his fault because Robert was in line for a drink, and he tried to get a pic with him whilst he was in line. So, tried to get between the man and his drink.
Oh, faux pas.
So yeah, that's it. Just a nice way to finish the episode with a bit of live listeners' corner.
Yeah, and Damon's really getting in touch with the actors. Like, he's writing the show there, so it's pretty cool.
Either
to hear.
that, or he's that, and Damon may have also figured out when we record.
Yeah.
People may be figuring out when it is that we record, so they can send us these emails, because it was only sent about 20 minutes ago. So
yeah.
But yeah, thanks very much for that, Damon. Good to hear from you. And that kind of rounds off the episode, I guess.
Yeah, what a bonus finish. All right. Well, I think that's us done. We're taking a slightly out of sync mid-season break from now, aren't we?
Yeah, no episode next week, unfortunately. So this will be out. So you'll be hearing this on the 12th if you're listening to this on the day of release. No episode on the 19th. Next one will be the 26th.
Yes.
26th of June for the next episode. So sorry you have to wait, but unfortunately, I know that you're not going to be available, are you, Toby?
No, not quite. No, and it does take quite a lot of time to, well, for me at least, I know it takes an hour to watch the episode, but to get all the notes sorted and make sure you have all the thoughts formulated in your head, it does take a little while each week. And I know that you particularly, Alex, you're involved with a lot of the admin and arranging the episode and editing it, which must involve quite a long amount of work.
Yeah, it takes up quite a bit of time.
Yeah, so
but
every so often we do need just to have a little week off, I guess. But we're very keen to carry on.
So all being well, we'll be back as usual on the 26th. So thanks very much for joining us again. It's caughtonthewire.wordpress.com for all the updates. We'll be letting you know what's going on. If there's any further delays, hopefully that won't be the case, but we'll let you know first on there. And feel free to send us any more emails. Just contact form on the website, or go to send us an email to caughtonthewire@gmail.com.
And if you'd like to be featured on the live listeners' corner, then please email 7:30 to 10 p.m. British time on a Wednesday evening. Otherwise, we'll read you out.
What a giveaway!
Sorry, guys.
You're ruining the magic. But yeah. If you want, that's pretty much when we normally record. So if you send them in around the time that Damon did, you'll catch us right at the end. Nice little bumper ending. But yeah, thanks very much for joining us. Good to be doing it again. We'll be back again in 2 weeks' time. Take care.
See you then.
What you know about Baltimore? What you know about